There was another Supreme Court case today that was also a liberal bloodbath along with the Hobby Lobby decision. This isn't getting as much coverage as the other is, and it's equally as bad, man, so this deserves a hell of a lot of coverage. In this case, it's about unions, and the plaintiff, Pamela Harris, is basically providing in-home care to her disabled son, and she's receiving Medicare funds to do so. So in essence, Pamela is one of hundreds of thousands of people who is basically a semi-public employee. Okay, that's a good way of categorizing it. Now, because of that, and the fact that unions collectively bargain on behalf of state-funded home caregivers, she is required to pay union dues to the public union, and then again, they go out there and they publicly bargain on her behalf. And basically, they have a system set up where these people pay so that they don't essentially freeload, which is they don't get all the protections that are brought about by the unions without paying their union dues, right? So keep in mind, the dues help them. Okay, and what I mean by that is it's provable. So the Medicaid-funded home caregivers make between $8.50 and $12.50 an hour. That might not sound like a lot, but a lot of non-state caregivers literally make less than minimum wage because when it comes to in-home caregivers, they have an exemption, a loophole that's carved out that they don't even get basic minimum wage protections. So what we have here is a situation where a semi-public worker is getting protections from the public unions, and they are paying their dues. So this one woman stepped forward and said, I don't want to pay my dues. I don't want to pay them. So what did the Supreme Court rule? In a 5-4 decision, they decided that the caregiver does not have to contribute to the union. So what happens from here, and why is this such a horrendous decision for workers, for the unions, for progressives, and for the country? Now what's going to happen is you'll have all these semi-public workers freeloading off of the unions. Okay, and the unions, I don't know how they'll be able to fully fund all their actions and what they do and how they lobby and whatnot, right? So what happens is eventually the wages of these semi-public workers is going to fall. Why? Because the unions are going to shrink. They're not going to be able to protect people enough. And then they'll sit there and they'll wonder why. Gee, I used to make more money before. Why don't I make as much now? Well, maybe because you sued to try to not pay your union dues, and now the union is crushed, and now you make less money, and nobody's there to collectively bargain for you. They'll sit there and they'll wonder why. Holy shit, why am I making less money now than I was before? I'm telling you, the unions will lose a lot of money because of this, and they're going to become less powerful, because before, when they had, you know, hundreds of thousands of semi-public workers that were members of the union, you know, they were able to have at least some money to try to lobby and counter the dominance of corporations that, you know, give money to politicians and get them to do their bidding. So now unions, which are already not nearly as powerful as corporations, they just got dealt an even bigger blow because the Supreme Court basically legalized the freeloading of semi-public workers off of what the union does. Look, and keep in mind, man, I want you to understand something. A lot of people will try to frame this as if it's a choice issue. Like, no, oh, what are you doing? You're so unreasonable. The caregivers just want the choice to not pay their union dues. They just want to choose whether or not to be in the union. That's all that's going on here. But what's going to happen? Because we saw this happen already in some right-to-work states. What happens is you propose it as if it's a choice, right? And then people all decide, well, I'm not going to pay because it's a little bit that comes out of my paycheck. But then the unions can't function. And then your pay is going to drop even more, and it's a loss. It's a net loss of money. In fact, there was a study when they were doing, I forget which state it was, what is it, Michigan, where it's Scott Walker who's the governor? I think it might have been there, where you make about $1,700 less every single year if you're not in a union compared to if you are in a union. So they call it a right-to-work state. It's really a right-to-work for less state. And what happens is people aren't educated, and they don't realize that, well, wait a second, if I don't pay my union dues, then eventually I'm going to be making less money anyway. So it's actually better if I pay my union dues and then they keep the wages even higher. It's a net win for my pocket if I pay a little bit in union dues and then they collectively bargain and I end up making more money and getting better benefits. But people get greedy and they're not educated. So they decide, well, how about I leave the union and I don't pay my dues, but I still get all the protections that the union gives me. And then again, they don't realize that that can't happen. When you stop paying your union dues, then the unions aren't as powerful, and then you end up net losing money. So while they frame it as if they just want the choice to be in the union or not be in the union, that's really not the conversation that's at hand. The conversation at hand is, do you want to allow people to opt out of unions and freeload and then destroy the unions? And then everybody will make about $1,700 less on average and get worse benefits and you name it.